Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's HP Live Book Club presentation. During the course of the presentation, we want this to be really interactive. So if you look over at your GoToWebinar panel, on the right-hand side of your screen, you are going to see a chat box. If you have any discussion questions, comments, anything for Joel, go ahead and type those in the chat box. And if you want to be brave and raise your hand, and I'll open up your mic, and you can speak live to our author today. So today's author is Dr. Joel Bennett, and he's going to be discussing his new book, Heart-Centered Leadership, which he co-authored with Susan Steinbrecher. Joel is president of Organizational Wellness and Learning System, otherwise known as OWLS. Then it's a consulting firm that specializes in evidence-based wellness and e-learning technologies to promote organizational health and employee well-being. Dr. Bennett first delivered stress management programming in 1985, and OWLS programs have since reached over 20,000 workers across the United States. He's also the author of over 20 peer-reviewed research articles, and he's co-authored 3 books, including Heart-Centered Leadership, Live Well, Lead Well, that we're discussing today, and new book, Raw Coping Power, and we're so pleased to have him here today. Joel?
Hi, good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
So, this is a book discussion, right?
This is a book discussion. So this is kind of like your neighborhood book club party without the wine. I mean, you're free to have wine at your own house. I can't see what you're doing. So this is where we've all read a book or want to read a book and get together and discuss it. And what's great about it is we have the actual author of the book here today. So I will kick things off if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And Joel, would you mind telling me what inspired you to write this book?
Well, was short of going into my entire life story. My master's thesis, interestingly, was on love and power in romantic relationships. And that sort of was one of the places I got started. And there's this principle of least interest, which says that the person who's least interested in the continuation of the relationship is the person who has more power in that relationship. And I actually studied 100 couples and looked at how they negotiated who did what, who called the shots, and followed them up a year afterwards. And so what we found in there was that those couples, so we looked at both their love for each other and their perceptions of power in the relationship. And what we found was that a year later, the best predictor of whether they had broken up or not was an imbalance in power. So it is true that the person who is least in love has more power, right? That we found. But what was interesting is that didn't seem to make that much of a difference. I don't want to go into all the subtleties, but the key was being able to work out who's in control, right? and not having it be so extreme. So then I did my dissertation on power and influence in leadership. And I found that the need for power and the need for influence, if it's not mitigated, if it's not balanced out, was associated with cardiovascular risk. And so then I started looking at all the literature, and I saw that there's this whole way that people who have power, need power, wield power, and don't necessarily do it in a mindful way, not only put others at risk, but they put themselves at risk. Isn't that interesting?
That is.
So then I went to this was all in the 80s, and in the late 90s I went to a conference, international conference on work stress and health, and I listened to one paper after another about how one of the best predictors of an employee's health is how well he or she got along with his boss. If I don't get along with my boss, or if my boss is, I won't use the word, you know, but we can think of all kinds of things we'd like to call our bosses. I'm at risk for cardiovascular disease, for high cholesterol. And since that time, in the past 15 years, there's been more and more studies that have come out that have pretty much said the same thing. So this book, when Susan approached me to help write the book, I really wanted to bring into the mix this idea of self-care and health. And you'll note that in the 7 principles of heart-centered leadership, care for the heart is one of the key principles and virtues. So I wanted to write a book that would help managers and leaders do a better job of not only taking care of others, but themselves as well.
That's great. It makes a lot of sense. As everyone's had that boss, and I live with someone who has that boss, and it does make a significant difference in a lot of things.
If I might interject a word, as you were speaking, Joel, I was remembering my 27 years in the Navy and my subsequent career, which was in financial planning, in a company that utilized retired officers from the military as their financial planners. This was back in the 80s. And I remember going through courses and working with coaches to try to help us military types transform to a more heart-centered leader, if you will, than we were brought up like in the military. I really enjoyed reading and making comparisons between my life in the military and what I had learned earlier in the 80s to what you have wrapped together in the book. I thought it was a really great read.
So I have to ask, was that successful? Were they able to get these hardcore military types to be a little bit softer?
Yes, but you can't handle the truth.
Yeah.
Oh yes. No, I was completely transformed, as you know.
As I know. You're a good man, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning. Despite what your screen says, I'm not Michael O'Connelly. Thought I should clear that up. Mike was at a conference today, and I am Kelly House. So forget
and
what
we're
it says on
happy
the
about
screen.
that.
Yep.
Thank you.
So do other people get a chance to ask questions now, or how do we proceed, or do we talk more?
We're going to continue talking until somebody is brave enough.
Be brave.
So be brave. That's why we're here. It's an interactive discussion. So any thoughts on the books, comments, parts you want to discuss, parts you want clarification on, go ahead and type those into the chat box, and we will get them out there. And even better, if you raise your hand, if you look over in your box on the attendee list, you'll see a little hand. It looks like this. Just click on that. I'll see that your hand is raised. I will open up your mic, and you can join right into the discussion. So feel free to do that at any time, and don't worry about interrupting, or if we're discussing, it's for everybody. So feel free at any time to do that. So in the meantime, we'll continue on with our discussion. So Joel, I noticed on page 17 you're talking about the distinction between a manager, a leader, and a heart-centered leader. And what are the differences between those roles, and what is the significance? Yeah.
So let me show that. I'll kind of show that diagram here. If people who have a webcam, it has an image there on the page where it looks at manager, leader, heart-centered leader, and how they balance 3 different factors: associates, customers, and profits, right? And the image of the manager, interestingly, is one that is juggling. So the manager has to, from a managerial perspective, and a number of people make this distinction between management and leadership. My job is to make sure we focus on the goal, maintain profitability, maintain whatever we need to maintain in terms of our vision and where we're headed. But in order to do that, I have to manage not just my my staff and make sure I'm serving my customers and make sure I'm managing to assure profit. I also have to manage my time. And so I'm also juggling my time. And what I've seen in a lot of the work on management is that time management is such a core skill from the manager perspective. What I've seen on the difference between management and leadership is that time becomes something that fades in the background for on a leadership. It's not something I juggle as much as I'm able to be more flexible and put it aside more and put associates first. So that's the key. That's a key difference. The manager is kind of juggling it all, whereas the leader is, I'm going to put my staff first, because if I do a good job of leading them, the customers and the profit's going to take care of itself. So so there, I'm not like concerned about getting it done now, right? You know, which is the time factor. Now, these are not, of course, black and white. You know, ideally, you have both management and leadership. And so heart-centered leadership is not only about being, quote, soft. You have to have both the management skill and the leadership skill. Heart-centered leadership, what we argue, is, again, a third part that's integrated to management and leadership. And it really has to do with compassion, mindfulness, and the virtues, and putting that first. Because what we see is that, going back to all the research I talked about, those managers that are more compassionate, those leaders that are more interpersonally sensitive, and you've seen a large increase in interest in emotional intelligence, what ends up happening is the research shows that those, quote, best places to work, where you have compassionate leadership, you have more sensitivity to associates' needs, where you are willing to be humble and not always be a hard-pushing, high-demanding, desk-pounding power type, those end up being places that have more profitability. And so heart-centered leadership is different from leadership in that it even goes a step further, not just putting associates first, but putting virtue first, and also integrates the management part. So that's a distinction. And again, the picture on the page, which it's a pretty good job, actually, of making that clear. So it's hard. This is not easy to do, because our culture really, business schools really focus on management. And yet you see more and more get a leadership degree or take these leadership courses. So there's growing interest in this. We think that it needs to go to a whole other level with heart-centered leadership.
You know, have you found that this works better in some industries than others? And I'm up here in the Rust Belt, so I'm specifically thinking of automotive, which if there's an old school, good old boy, tough, demanding kind of hardcore industry, you know, old-fashioned, get it done, that's the industry. Have you found a difference between different?
I think it's a great point. I'd love to hear what other people who are on the call have to say about that. And I think that, you know, it depends on where your orientation is. So service industry, manufacturing industry, military, right, and so forth. What I've seen is that there's industry to industry difference, right, to your point. So some industries are more macho or more command and control. And for many reasons they need to be, because of safety issues, because of really tight manufacturing protocols. You really need to stay on top of the machinery. So for that reason, I don't want to be stigmatizing, right, of those types of industries where you do need that. You need to have that strong management. At the same time, there are industry-to-industry differences. There are also strong differences within industry. So you don't have to always be the prototype or the stereotype. I think that's a key part, and I think you'll see that pretty much in, if you look at Harvard Business Review, if you look at the best companies to work for, if you look at Jim Collins' work on Good to Great, if you look at, you'll see that in every industry you do have the opportunity to be a heart-centered leader.
Very cool. Right. In the book, on page 22, how did you come up with what we're looking at here on the screen, that virtues concept?
You know, that's a great question. We wrote this book prior to all of this work that came out in positive psychology. I think our first edition was in 2000 and, when was it? 3, but we had written it pretty much 2001. In fact, we were writing it, I think, started writing it around the time of 9/11. But since that time, there's been a real flourishing of literature on positive psychology and virtues in psychology and studying of more positive factors of human potential. And when Susan came to me, she, as an executive coach, has to do a lot of work with people around the principles. So if you look at these principles, know thyself, don't judge, they need what you need, letting go, know your impact, and associates have a choice. We'll start with those. She was sharing with me an initial manuscript that had those pieces in there because that's what she needed to do to work with executives who were derailing, executives who were command and control, executives who were not healthy, and that she was assigned to help because they were messing up, right? Or that came to her because they were messing up. So it really came originally from a very practical place. This is what she was learning to train them in. And what I did was I started looking, well, what are the virtues associated with these? And we had these conversations, and so each of these principles has a deeper virtue part. And we spent a lot of time going through and talking about both of our experience, mine more on the research side and hers more on the executive coaching side, and that's how we came up with them. But I insisted on putting that emotional health piece in, that self-care piece in, because it kept showing up. So that's the short story.
And what's the difference between the principles and the virtues?
Well, you know, I would love to throw that out to the audience. I mean, I think we have so much discussion about principles in, you know, the 6 principles of this and the 4 principles of that and the 5 principles of following, you know, good management. But I don't think we talk as much about the inside-out part of that. You know, principles are like, here's the 10 commandments that Moses gave us to go ahead and lead our life. But virtues are more of an inside. But that's a question I think everybody on the call really needs to ask themselves, truthfully. I mean, that's the point of the book. In fact, the subtitle of our first edition of the book was Heart-Centered Leadership, an Invitation to Lead from the Inside Out. And that's where the virtues come from.
All right, we have our first brave soul who would like to be unmuted. So hold on a second. Okay. I can't speak and type and spell at the same time. So PJ, that is going to be spelled atrociously. Anyways, all right, this is PJ. PJ,
I think I'm unmuted. Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Yeah.
Yay, we can hear you.
Hi. It's been so wonderful sitting back and just being mindful and present. I love it. You guys are amazing, and thank you, Joel. Thank you, Joe, and I want to say Michael, but it's not.
Kelly.
I know it's Kelly. For putting this together, and the book is just amazing. I actually know of your book a way long time, the first edition, and I just haven't reread it or anything, but I thought I'm going to be brave and get on anyway and see what you're up to. So I just wanted to comment about your comment about the industry you were talking about. I actually, just after years of being on my own doing coaching, came into a corporate environment. And it's a corporate wellness environment. So we're a company that works with corporate wellness. Mm-hmm. So unlike like the environment you were talking about, Kelly, you would think the foundation and ground would be really ready for heart-centered. In many ways, it is heart-centered here. Yet there's a strong focus still on more of a command and control over the way health and physical wellness happens. And so there's this little door that's opening now around more whole person wellness and whole person health, which I see as interesting now as a correlation, and your book really brought it together for me. Just seeing this slide is how people see health for themselves affects how they see the health of their leadership and their management, and how they manage working and coaching with others, right? Which really I see has had a big impact on the organization. So I don't even know if I have a question. I'm just so in alignment.
Well, let me. So I want to clarify. So you're saying the organization is being more open to this idea of heart-centered leadership, or at least being more willing to embrace it compared to a more traditional command and control focus. Is that
yes, I think by next. Yes, I am, and what they're seeing is they're seeing that in their book of business, like what they're doing in their business, that health and wellness for employees in a corporate environment needs to be more than just fitness and nutrition. We need to look at the whole person, right? And so since they're just starting to embrace that, and I just facilitated a mindfulness at work workshop here about 6 months ago. They're really starting to go, what about this emotional health? And as you have, down here in this self-care, and I'm looking at that now for myself, and wow, and so now it's like, oh, maybe that's how we manage people here too, and so it's just really kind of the concentric circles are opening up, if you will.
That's wonderful.
To just start to have a ripple effect, I think.
I have to ask, so since this is wonderful, first of all, I'm excited that you're doing mindfulness work. That's wonderful. But has something happened that allowed this change to start happening? Can you point to any particular thing that happened? Is it the mindfulness work or something else?
Yes, I think it is the mindfulness work. I think I just started in a company a year ago, and that was my background, is doing mindfulness and life. I'm a life coach and doing that, and so I came into the organization to work in health coaching. And so since we've looked at health coaching and started to broaden it more to lifestyle, that discussion has opened up. And so, yes.
That's wonderful.
One of the triggers that it's kind of brought it into, oh, wait a minute, know thyself. That's exactly it right there.
It's interesting because mindfulness, as you know, comes out of the Buddhist tradition. And mindfulness is always a balancing of concentration and focus and effort right on the performance side with compassion and, balance on the other side. So I think, and you can disagree with me, but that's my understanding, is that when you do mindfulness, you're not just asking people to be, you can't be mindful without also having some self-compassion.
Yeah.
So
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to see this interest in mindfulness. It's kind of like bringing heart-centered leadership in through the back door.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's great.
But I need somebody like you, I think, to walk through the front door.
Well, give them a copy of the book.
That's exactly, in fact, I just invited 2 other people to be on this last minute, and they're not able to, but they're like, oh my gosh, I still want to be on it. So I think, you know, the front door is starting to show up.
Well, thanks. That's great, and hopefully we'll hear more, but that's really nice to hear from you, and I totally am rooting for you. Go for it, you know?
Thank you. I just wanted to let you guys know I was here now, so I can go unmuted and listen now.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, PJ, for sharing. Anyone else who wants to be brave, feel free. I have a question from Carol, who says, good afternoon, first of all. Good afternoon, Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Said she hasn't read the book yet, but wonders if Joel would comment on Chapter 5, Letting Go, and what are some strategies for building trust, and what do you mean by detachment?
Yeah, well, that'll take a couple. That's a weekend retreat, Carol. Let's go get a weekend retreat going. So, Chapter 5, you know, every chapter. I'm really big into aphorisms, you know. So, you know, at the beginning of every chapter, we have our quotes, you know. So, this chapter begins with, if you stand straight, do not fear a crooked shadow. And it also is a quote from Dee Hock, who was the founder and CEO emeritus from Visa. I don't know if you've ever read Dee Hock's book on chaotic organizations. He says, never hire or promote in your own image. It is foolish to replicate your strength and idiotic to replicate your weakness. It is essential to employ, trust, and reward those whose perspective, ability, and judgment are radically different from yours. It is also rare, for it requires uncommon humility, tolerance, and wisdom. So, you know, what do we mean by letting go? First, starting there. Okay, we've been talking about command and control, right? And I hope we can talk more about this, but very often for a manager, it is hard, especially if you've been trained in that military model, to let go and just say, I'm gonna take this so far, and then I have to trust that my staff are going to go ahead and step up and do things. So when we talk about letting go, from the principal side, we're talking about learning when to not be a micromanager, learning how to delegate. We're talking about skills on the principal side. How can I negotiate this relationship, whether it's a performance improvement conversation, working off of performance appraisal, dealing with a disciplinary incident, whatever it is. What kind of skills can I bring so that when I talk to my staff, I'm not forcing it down their throats, because we know that doesn't work. So on the principal side, letting go means being able to bring an attitude of like, I know that I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make that horse drink. So that's what it means on the principal side. On the inner side, on the detachment side, again, interestingly, we talk about mindfulness. Detachment means compassionate letting go, being able to understand that this problem is not my problem until it becomes my problem. That is, as a manager, again, I talk about manager leadership and heart-centered leadership. I may have to let go of an employee, right? If that employee does not shape up, but I need to at least give that employee an opportunity to show them that I can trust them to make a change. And so in order to do that effectively, I need to model a certain amount of detachment myself, a certain amount of poise myself. And in order to do that, I really do have to trust. So that's basically what we mean on the principle side and on the virtue side. I hope that answers the question.
Carol also added that a weekend retreat sounds like a great time.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I will say that most people gravitate right toward letting go. They consider that to be their most difficult area.
And kudos to Michaela Connolly on letting go today and letting us run the show for her while she's out at her conference.
OMG!
So she has mastered the whole letting go thing and trusted Joe and I here to
She's not
Take
quite
over.
letting go. Guess who that phone call was from? Anyhow, boy, that was a great discussion on letting go and detachment and trust. I can't help myself from going back to my years in the military. That was such a difficult thing to do. And as a matter of fact, we didn't even try. You know, back then, the dark ages, micromanagement was key to getting things done the way you wanted to get them done. And if you wanted to step up the ladder and promotions, they had to be done right. And there was the company, the squadron, the ship's way to get things done, and you couldn't deviate from that. So the poor folks in the trenches always felt the hot breath of the manager over their shoulder, looking at their output to make sure that it met expectations. So you really struck a nerve with that section of the book. To be honest, I haven't read the whole book, but I'm going to. I've read several of the chapters. One of them was that detachment and trust, and it really hit home. And it just seemed to me at my stage in life that it seems like almost an insurmountable challenge to convert the way people think to become more heart-centered in the way they approach their leadership. I may be just too far down the road to envision it happening in a strategic sense.
Well, you know, Joe, I really appreciate your candor, and anyone else who wants to share here. You know, the thing about the virtues is that it's an ideal, right, to aspire to. If you go back to Aristotle and the idea of the mean and everything that he talked about, and ethics, we can't be all of those virtues all the time. You know, even the Knights of the Round Table each had their own strengths, right? And so you may have difficulty in that area.
I think we lost Joel's audio.
Joel, your audio's cutting out. Can you hear me? Can't hear you, no. Ah.
No.
No. No. Joe and I can hear each other.
I can read your lips, Joel.
But during this brief commercial pause, it would be a great time for everyone out there to ponder the book and put in your comments and questions. He's back.
Hi. So what I was saying just before whatever that was, Joe, I would recommend, where is your strength? That is, when you look at the wheel of virtues and principles, think about where you do have more sense of personal development, right?
Yeah.
And to focus on that, because as you start looking at the virtues, they all end up relating to each other. Mm-hmm. So you can actually, through commitment to personal growth, for example, the first one, become more detached. Through open-mindedness, become more detached, right? Through self-care, become more detached. And so you can actually, as a coach, you can use, if I were coaching somebody, and I do, when we do our Lead Well, Live Well training, that's what I ask them to do, is to focus on where their strengths are and look at how internally they can use that to leverage the areas of their growth. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yep.
You know, Joel, is there a point where you could go too far with something, like too authentic? Maybe there's a little piece of myself that I probably should not bring to work.
Oh, Kelly, are we talking about someone in particular?
No, no.
Well, you know, I throw that out to the other people who are listening. You know, do we hold ourselves back at work and feel like we're not being our authentic self, right? And what's going on there? So Kelly's question is really one I'll open up to everyone. Is there a place where we can become too authentic? See if anybody has a response to that. I'm not trying to avoid the question, but I think it's a really compelling one. Because everybody talks about employee engagement, right? What's really interesting is all this talk about employee engagement and incentivizing employees and getting them to participate and all these other things. Well, isn't it possible that people are not going to be engaged because the message they're getting is they can't be their authentic selves, right? So it's like we try to manipulate an engagement culture, but people don't really feel the culture supports them in their self-expression. Any comments about that? I'll answer the question, but I wonder if anyone else has anything to say. Any hand raises or anything?
Oh, I've got a hand up. Woo. All right, PJ, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just 3 points. Thank you so much, Kelly, for bringing that up, because I think that was my personal experience of being so authentic, because I didn't work in an organization, and so that was just who I was. And when I came to organization, I found out very quickly, culturally wise, how much of that I needed to readjust, because it was a little overwhelming for people, I think. Because I think it's a balance. So that's the word. I just wrote down balance and just noticing. So noticing when, okay, I got to meet that person just where they are and how much they can see of me being authentic, and at the same time and stay in my own personal integrity and not pull back and hide. So it's like an ongoing process. But what I can say is, over the past 9 months, I've been able to stay more. I found kind of that balancing point, and I'm noticing when I tip, I get to feeling kind of edgy. So then I know that I went too far, and now I'm getting frustrated because they're not seeing that. So
they're not seeing. I'm sorry, they're not seeing what?
Well, I've hit their kind of blinders. If that makes sense, where it's too real for them.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. I'm reminded of. Are you familiar with Fritz Perls and the Gestalt movement?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So.
Yeah, So that's yep.
So, go ahead.
And Carol has a different take. She thinks you can't be too authentic, but agrees that PJ makes a great point, but maybe we could shift culture so that authenticity can become more acceptable.
Love it.
Yeah, this is, I think, the real challenge. And a lot of people are, since we're on the wellness call here, criticize the wellness industry for becoming maybe too artificial with carrots and sticks and incentives and just getting metrics from people, but is it really, really talking to and speaking to the true, authentic self of employees? And I think what we're hearing here is that it's work. You have to work it. And I would challenge anybody on the call or listening to this that that's your real job as a wellness professional. It's not necessarily getting people engaged, but being as authentic as you possibly can. And then the rest will take care of itself. Yeah, authenticity is a great one. So I'm happy we're talking about that.
And is there, I'm thinking of particular, like a job like a teacher, or where you really just can you be your real, authentic self? I know I have a teenager, and she doesn't like me to be authentic. I might be embarrassing.
What do you do that makes her think that you're being too authentic?
Oh, I might sing. I might dance. I might tell a joke. Her friend might hear the joke. It would be mortifying.
I think our children hate us.
I think they do. I hear it'll turn around in about 10 years, but yeah.
It goes in cycles.
Does it?
Well, I'm going to go back to the book, on the authenticity side, since we're talking about it. The principle for that is they need what you need. And it really speaks to PJ's, I think, comment about balance. It's understanding that we are not separate and not really different from our associates. We are all human with similar physical, mental, and spiritual needs. So am I being truly authentic if I'm being too real at the expense of others' comfort, right? Then, it's like pushing it a little bit too hard. So the idea here for authenticity is not being necessarily so brash in your honesty, but doing it in a skillful way. Instead of manipulating, being yourself and hoping for the best. I hope that helps. So that we go into a lot of depth on this. I think the real issue in corporate America is the protecting our self-image at all costs. That's the real issue for authenticity. Doing everything we can to show that we're doing things right, to the point where not only do we pull the wool over other people's eyes, we pull the wool over our own eyes. And that's what's happened. And that was the reason, I think, one of the reasons we went into the 2008 financial crisis was because of a lack of authenticity. So,
I concur with you there.
One thing that I found reading the book, not being an official leader, more of a minion, but
you're the best minion a guy could ever have.
Thanks. But you know what? I've noticed just reading the book and then looking for this kind of heart-centered leadership, I've been finding it in people that aren't necessarily leaders. Like, here's a cute story. My son rides a bus to school. Great bus driver. They're on time every day, all winter long in Michigan this year, which is a phenomenal accomplishment, with a smile on her face, with a wave. And I asked my son about it. I said, Susan is great because she's nice, but the whole bus is under control because my son doesn't like kids throwing stuff and going wild. It drives him a little crazy. I said, well, how does she keep the bus under control? She goes, because everybody likes her and they just don't want her to be upset with them.
That's wonderful.
So yeah, and so many other ones do it by yelling and punishing. And she's like, I don't know, we just like her. We want to make her happy.
That's such a great, great story. Yeah, let's just give a shout out to all the wonderful bus drivers in America.
Yeah, not something I don't know, you'd think right off your head as being a leader, but she is. She's got 40, 50 kids she needs to inspire to behave every day so she can drive.
It's interesting. Over the 10 years that the book has been out, I've actually heard more from people like that than from corporate leaders. People who have used this in their personal life and have recognized it in their personal life. That's wonderful because it's really about yourself. It's about applying these to your own personal life. And believe me, as a husband, I get confronted every day. I'm not necessarily walking my talk. So.
Authenticity is the root of it. I lost my train of thought laughing at your joke there, Joel. But I'll come back to it.
Well, one of the things we could ask people, I guess, Kelly, is to share if there's an area that they consider to be a strength or an area for the people who are on the call that they might, and while we have a few more minutes, if there's an area that they are challenged in? I don't know if that's a way we want to.
Yeah. Well, we type in an area that you find challenging, and then in the meantime, I'm going to read this question from Krishna to Joel. So, having lived in Europe and the USA, she finds a large, she finds a large portion of what we call authentic actually quite fake. For example, individuals unwilling to really state what they think or feel to not rock the boat. Again, very generally speaking, of course.
So I think if I understand, she's saying that in the States, people are, the norm for authenticity is not as great as we think it is. We act as though we can say whatever we want, but in truth, people are more conformist than they. I think if that's right, Krishna, just write yes, and we're actually more conformist than we. Yeah. So yeah, it's sort of a false notion that comes with this idea. Well, it's a free country. I could say whatever I want, right? And we get the interesting thing there is that falls into the pride section on humility and humbleness. And so it's so interesting how the virtues kind of interact. So Krishna, thank you for this, because I agree from what I know about when I've been to Europe and I've been abroad, people dig a little bit deeper and share from a deeper place about what's really going on instead of kind of speaking the corporate talk. And a lot of people leave jobs because of this very thing. You know, they're just, you hear it all the time. I'm tired of corporate America. I think this is what they're often talking about, is it's not genuine. So what happens in our country, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this, is that we mistake freedom for authenticity. We think that just because we can say whatever we want, we really know what we want, and we know what's going on. But we've gotten so distracted by all the exterior, you know, this app, this Facebook, this smartphone, this whatever. We forget that we're trapped in all the commercial trappings of things, and we think that that's who we are, right? I mean, people have talked about this forever, and so it's not really about authenticity. You know, it's really about this false sense of freedom. And believe me, I mean, this is a long conversation involving Karl Marx.
Here, here, Joel. I'm out on a limb with you.
All right. Carol wants to know, how can you share this type of leadership idea with those that are controlling or very managerial?
Well, as I was trying to say earlier, I think opening the conversation, well, there are several ways. We have a program called Lead Well, Live Well, and if you go to the Heart-Centered Leadership website, you can find a link there, or type in Lead Well, Live Well. And one thing that we do is we ask people to take a self-assessment. And one of our self-assessment tools asks about both management style and leadership style. And it also asks about need for power and need for influence. So one of the things that I think the field of health promotion needs to do, and this is why we actually created the Lead Well, Live Well program, is to speak to managers' needs independent of health, to speak to their interests in terms of being able to be a better manager, to speak to their interests in terms of the things that irritate them about employees. And you have to have a gradual or graduated conversation with them. And using a self-assessment tool that asks them to rate their leadership style is often a very good jumping off place, because they're going to be interested in that, right? And of course, there are more sophisticated or more in-depth tools like a 360 assessment. But then once you have them talking, you can then bring them around to this conversation. So I want to get to the point here. There's like I said, there's several ways to approach it. once you can have them start talking, then you ask them about their strengths. Managers do like to talk about themselves to a certain degree. And if you can ask them to talk about what they think they're good at, and then tie it into either a principle or a virtue, then you've got that conversation going. So I hope I'm answering the question, is you've got to get them into a place where they feel like they can talk about who they are, and then let the conversation go, and then slowly seed the conversation with, well, that reminds me of this idea associates have a choice, or that reminds me of this idea of knowing your impact. It sounds like you really know your impact. And that it's a coaching style. I hope that answers the question.
And then PJ has a question about communication technology distraction with heart-centered leadership. How do you keep the human in what we do at work?
I think, is she asking about if we've gotten too technical?
Let me unmute her because she doesn't mind being unmuted. PJ?
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. That in the essence of becoming more efficient and communicating through social network chatter, this and that and everything else, we've gotten away from personal interaction.
Well, you know, I have to hand it to Kelly and Joe and Michaela, and you know, I hope they'll include me in their little clique. But we're doing it right now.
Exactly.
And this is what we're trying to do with these book discussions, with a lot of what we do with HP Live, and that's our commitment at OWLS as well. We do a lot of highly interactive webinars. When I do training, webinar-based training, we've got people talking like this and creating a community, and we do champion training. So I think it's not being, what's the word? Fearful of technology.
Yeah.
And instead leveraging it. It's like everybody's gotten, I don't get it. You know, it's like, it's not about the next smartphone app. You know, it's about this. It's about having this great conversation and talking with each other and supporting each other. It's about the we and wellness, you know, and just using the technology for that. We've gotten so distracted by the technology rather than realizing how we can use it.
I love the word leverage because it is leverage and balance and infusion and integration. Beautiful.
You can do this. I mean, you could set up the same kind of thing that we're doing in your workplace. We'd be happy to help you getting people talking like this and start, because with this platform, now you can say, hey, let me show you my smartphone app, or let me show you this web page. So we're in control. It's like putting the control back where we are. It puts the primacy on know thyself, right?
Yep.
Great. Thanks, PJ.
That's great.
Right, and Krishna earlier wanted you to know that she was out on the limb with you. And Carol said, that's great, thanks. You answered your question. And one more question from Krishna. What about the restrictions/sexism in terms of women versus male leaders?
It is a serious problem. I don't know, Krishna, you might want to follow what's happening at the Harvard Business School, School of Management right now. Some of the women faculty there are, I think, complaining because the program has not done a good job of cultivating the female student managers. And so you'd think that by now that would not be a problem. So that's a whole other conversation. I would love to engage in a conversation about that. And it's interesting because Jane Fonda was interviewed this morning on Diane Rehm, and she's got a new book out, and she has a lot to, I think, say about women in America, and it's a tough one. Again, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I mean, there is a great deal of sexual abuse in our country, and she makes the claim that 1 in 3 girls have been sexually abused. At least some of the statistics are. And so that kind of domination, going back to power again, is very, very difficult to overcome. But we need to do something about that. So the sexism, you have to look at where is its roots, right? And what's really going on with people. I'm sorry if I got too deep on that one, but we really have to get at the root of the male domination ethos that continues. So I hope it's a tough one. That's why this book doesn't get, it's not on the bestseller list.
Give it a chance.
Yeah.
Say not yet.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
I hope we can talk more about that. Please email me.
Well, before we quit, and since you mentioned Jane Fonda, I am a Vietnam veteran. On public record, Jane, I forgive you.
We should send this to Jane. We're videotaping this, right?
Yeah. Don't let my fellow fighter pilot cronies hear me say that.
I was wondering if you're going to say anything about the Jane Fonda reference, Joe.
I did that for. I was goading you, Joe. That's really the only reason I brought it up.
I'm getting to know myself more and more every day.
Good for you.
All right, so we have literally 1 minute left, so I don't know, Joel, if you have any closing comments before we go?
Well, while we're here, thanks everybody. Really, the conversation is what makes this work. And I want to make a comment that my new book is coming out soon, which hopefully we'll do another one of these with that. Raw Coping Power.
Book?
Say what?
Is that another vegetarian book? Eating raw?
No, it's about how to be a resilient ex-Navy fighter pilot.
I'm just pulling the chain.
But no, this is wonderful. I hope we can do more of these, and I hope that everyone, my email is, we're at www.organizationalwellness.com or owls at organizationalwellness.com. And I'd love to be part of these conversations. We're on LinkedIn. And just that's where this, I think, change can really happen, is through authentic conversation. I really think that's where change can happen.
All right, well, thank you so much, Joel, for being with us today, and Joe, and everyone who attended, and those of you who participated. This is going to be recorded, so if you want to catch it later, it'll be on HP Live, or if you know somebody who really wanted to come but had to miss it, they can catch it there. Oh, probably next week when Michaela gets back and does the recording for me. It'll be available. So thank you, and everybody have a brilliant rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.